Hello everyone. In this lesson we will create the Tic Tac Toe game, the classic game, for Python. So in order to do that we just need three images. So we have this welcome.png, the X mark and the O mark. So let's go ahead and begin. So because this is a more complicated game, it will be divided into some parts to make it easier to control. So first of all, we will have the part that is responsible for the GUI. So anything that has to do with the graphics is going to be controlled by that part. And another one that will control every aspect of the game and how it works internally. So we will have the main procedural code, which will be calling multiple functions to run the whole game. We will import libraries, include images, and call functions to make this game interactive. And the refresh method will be part of this section, and it will be responsible to reset the game if the game has ended. So we will use functions for the GUI processing, such as the game initialize or the update state or mark. We will see what all of those will do. And then we will use the check state and click to track the status of the game, to see who won, and call any GUI function to update the graphics as well. So let's go ahead and show you how this will be done. So first of all, we'll import Pygame as pg, sys, and then we're going to do a simple from pygame.locals import everything. So we're importing everything from this here library, and also we need to import time. So these are just some libraries that we're going to use, so nothing too serious. Now let's set some global variables. Let's declare some global variables. So first of all, we have turn. So this will be responsible for which who has the turn to put his mark. Then we have the winner, which will be none as we start. Then we have the draw variable. This will be false at the beginning, and if it's a draw, then this will turn true. Then we will have the width, which will be equal to 400 pixels. And then we will have the height, which will be 400 pixels as well. Then let's set the color white. Remember, this has the values 255, 255, and 255. And then we will set a variable called CLR_line and set this to 10, 10, and 10, so a tuple. So this is just the line color, the color of our lines. And let's also set a grid, and this will be a list, an array, none times 3. This will make sense in a little bit, so we're just setting all of those here. None times 3. So this is just the grid that is empty by now, and we will start filling it with X and O's later. So these are the global variables that we will need for our game. Now let's get to initializing the game. So let's go pg.init to initialize our Pygame. Then let's set the FPS equal to 30, so the frames per second. And let's also create a clock, clk equals to pg.time.clock. So this is our clock over here. And let's also create a window. Let's set this equal to pg.display.setMode. This will be a width. Actually, this is a tuple, so width and height plus 100, 0, and 32. So these are just some flags here that are some additional parameters to our game surface. If you haven't already realized, this window here object is our game surface from the previous videos. And let's just also set the pg.display .set caption, and let's just call this Tic Tac Toe. So this is just the description of the window that is going to open up later. It's just to make this say something useful. And then let's just go ahead and read the images. So let's set the welcome image. This will be pg.image.load, and let's load remember the images have to be the same in the same folder as the .py file, and we're just loading them by using their name, so welcome.png. And let's also add the X image, which will be pg.image.load x.png, and finally o.png equals to pg.image.load and o.png. You remember these from the lesson about the images. So then what we have to do is let's just change their size by using the scale. So X image will be set to pg.transform.scale, and we're using the X image, and let's set this equal to 8080, so 80 pixels in width and 80 pixels in height. And let me just copy this, so this will be the same for the O image. Okay, and let's also transform our welcome image, so let's go ahead and add that here. Welcome equals pg.transform.scale, use the scale, use the welcome image, and let's just set this to width and height plus 100. Okay, perfect. And now let's just this needs to be O image. Okay, and then just paste our welcome onto the screen. So window.blit welcome, and let's just add the tuple of 10 and 10. So we're just pasting this at these coordinates on our screen, and then just pg.display.update to make sure all of these take effect. And now let's do time.sleep1. So let's just wait for 1 second. So let's go ahead and review all of this code that we've written yet. So we're just importing a few libraries. Here we're setting our global variables, so we're whose turn it is, who will be the winner if it's a draw, the width and the height of the window, the color white, the color of the line, and the grid. So the grid is now empty. Then we're initializing our game. We are setting the frames per second. We are setting up a clock. We are creating our game surface over here, and we're setting the caption to Tic Tac Toe. And then we are loading our images. Then we are transforming our images, so we are scaling them down. Then we are pasting the welcome image on the screen. We update the screen and we wait for 1 second. So pretty straightforward. We've seen all of these in detail in the previous lessons. Now let's go ahead and create the GUI function called Game Initialize. So this function will start the game. And we will also use this function when we need to restart the game. And this function will just create a 3x3 grid by drawing lines on the screen. So in the end, this will call the update state function to update the state of the game. So let's go ahead and create this. So define the game initialize method. And what this is going to do is it's going to fill the window with the white color. Now let's draw the vertical lines. So if you remember, the syntax for drawing lines is pg, or whatever our game is, pg.draw.line, and now we're using our game surface, so the window. Then we are using the color, so CLR color line. Now we are using the X and Y coordinates, so this will be a width, and let's divide this by 3. So a third of the width and 0. Then we have width divided by 3. And for height we have height divided by 3. And then 7 here. So if you remember, this will be the game surface, this will be the color of the line. This is the starting coordinates, this is the end coordinates, so we're starting at width divided by 3 and 0 for y, and we're drawing between these 2 points, and with a thickness of 7, so this integer here represents the thickness of the line. If you have any questions regarding this, you should go back to the shapes lesson. Now let's just draw the other line, so this will have a width divided by 3 times 2, and here the width will be times 2, and I think we're pretty good. And I just realized we don't need to divide this by 3, we can just do height, and just now draw the horizontal lines. So these are the vertical lines. Let's also mark this with a comment. So let's do vertical lines here and horizontal lines, and let's also add more comments to our code. So here we're just importing libraries. Here we're declaring our global variables. Here we are initializing game and creating all of the clock and windows that we need. Here we are just loading and scaling images, and we're also pasting them onto our display. So this is better now with comments, you can more clearly understand what's going on. Now here are the vertical lines, and let's also define the horizontal lines. So pg.draw.line, and this will be on the window with the line color. And now for the coordinates, this will be 0, this will be height divided by 3, and this will be this is CLR underscore line for the color of the line. And we also need a width here and a height divided by 3, and also don't forget the thickness, which is 7. So we need one more of these lines, and the difference here will be that we just multiply this by 2 and this one as well. Okay, I think we're pretty much done with the lines. So don't forget to display update, so pg.display.update. And let's now call the update underscore state. So we haven't defined this yet. Let's just go ahead and define it now. But just before we do so, let's just comment this line out. And let's run our program without defining this yet. And it's a good idea to run your programs regularly to make sure that there are no bugs or errors happening, because then you will be lost trying to figure out what's wrong. Whereas if you run it many times before, you will actually know what's wrong more easily. So let's go ahead and run it. And what we get is the welcome image for 1 second. And we actually forgot to run the game initialize here. So let's go ahead and call this function. So we get our image for 1 second. Let's also do some time dot sleep for 10 seconds, just so you are able to see what's happening here. So we're getting our initialize game initialize on the screen. So what this does now is it displays the welcome image for 1 second, and then it displays our grid. Now one thing to change here is just change these coordinates for the welcome image from 1010 to 00. This way this image is more centered here. Okay, that's all for now. So now if you go ahead and see this here, you can see we have left a little gap over here. Let's just draw there a black rectangle that just displays whose turn it is and what's happening generally in the game. So let's go ahead and delete the game initialize here. And let's define the actual update state function. So define update state. So now let's declare our global draw variable. And now let's check if winner is none. So if winner is none, and remember at the beginning of our game, the winner is actually none. So if winner is none, then let's just make a message that we just set the turn dot upper plus turn. So we're just turning, getting whoever's turn it is, and remember this dot upper method just makes this uppercase, and we're saying it's this guy's turn. Okay, this is just the message. And now let's take the else here, and our message will be equal to winner dot upper plus 1. So we're just getting whoever the winner is, if there is a winner, and we're converting this to uppercase, and we're saying this guy won. Okay, now let's go ahead and define if draw. So if it is a draw, the message will be game draw. Okay, now this is just the message handling, so we're just making sure our game our game messages are handled correctly. So now after this, let's go ahead and define a font. Set this equal to pg dot font dot font. Let's do none and 30. Now the text will be equal to font dot render. So we render the message. We're just making sure we can display the message on the screen. This should be 1, or this could be true. Come on, true. So both of these is correct. So 1 represents true. Just make sure you put one of those here. And now let's do 255, 255, and 255 for the color. And now let's just fill the window with the text. So window dot fill. Now let's do 0, 0, and 0, and 0, 400, 500, 100. So what's happening here is, instead of just filling the whole screen with a color, this represents a rectangle. So this has 4 points here, so 0, 400, 500, and 100. So we're creating this rectangle that starts from 0, 400 and has 500 pixels by 100 pixels. And we're just filling this with the color black. So in this, instead of just pasting the whole color on the whole screen, paste this color on a small part of the screen. So then let's get the text underscore rect and make this a text dot get rect. And now here let's define the center, which will be equal to width divided by 2 and 500 minus 50. So these are just the coordinates for our text. Now just play around with this and see how you can change this. These are just some values that I tested and found that they work best. And now let's just paste this onto our screen. So window.bleed, and let's paste our text. So text and text rect, and pg.display.update to just make sure that every change has been saved. Now, if we just go ahead and run here our game Initialize, and just make sure this here is at the bottom. Now, if we run this here, and then at the end, this runs the update state, let me also add some waiting time in between. So here I'm just going to do time.sleep for 10 seconds. This is just to demonstrate what's happening so far. So here you can see that we drew this rectangle and filled it with the color black. And we take whoever's turn it is, and we're saying X's turn. Okay, so now just delete the time.sleep and the game initialize here. So now what we have to do is define the check state function. So just close this down, and let's also write some comments here. So message handling happens here, and here we're just creating a font, and this part is responsible for displaying the message that we created previously. Okay, and then let's go ahead and define our new function. So check underscore state. So this function will be responsible to check the status of the game on each player move, and it is just going to check if a player has won, and then assigns that player to the winner variable if someone has won. And we will use that to display which player has won the game. If no one has won, then it will return a draw status. So the check state method is called each time a player puts his mark on the board. And finally, the update state will be called to update the general display. So let me just show you what I mean by that. Let's make the global grid, winner and draw. We will need all of those values. So now for row in range 03, we're just going to check a lot of things now. So bear with me now. If the grid on our particular row and on 0 here, so this will be each element, each first element on each row. So if this here is equal to grid row 1, and if this here is equal to grid row 2, and our grid here on row, so this could be anything. I'm just picking the first one, and you can say is not none. You could say here that this guy has won. So this is just checking if there is a win by checking each row. So we're checking if the 3 elements on each row are the same and they are also not blank. So this is just checking each column to see if they match, and if this is true, we're just setting the winner to be equal to the grid row 0. So the winner will be actually X or O, depending on who won over here. And remember, this will run if somebody has won by putting everything on the same column, putting their mark on the same column. So now pg.draw.line, so we're drawing the line on the window. Now we're using the 255 and 0 and 0 for the color. Now we're using 0 and row plus 1 times height divided by 3 minus height divided by 6. So we will just be drawing a line between all of the marks that have won already, and we're starting this line from this point over here, and we're ending it at the point of width, comma, row plus 1 times height divided by 3. And let me just delete some spaces so this is more compact now. Okay, so this will be like that. Okay, now the height divided by 3 minus height divided by 6, and 4 for the thickness. So just take my word for it, these are the values that you need. I've tested them, so I know. Just use something like that in order to make this happen. Now use the break to get out of the for loop if we've found what we need. And just remember, I didn't just come up with these, I tested different values and actually calculated which value will be best. And just now, to save time, take my word for it and use these values here. So then we need to break out of the for loop if we've found what we're looking for. Now let's go ahead and outside, this is a win on a particular column. Now we're just doing the win on a different row. So for column in range 0 and 3. So just keep in mind, if all of the rows, if all of the elements on a particular row are the same, you've won by row. If all of the elements in a particular column are the same, you have won in a column. So now let's just do if our grid 0 and column here is equal to grid 1 and column here, and this is also equal to 2 and column. So this is one thing you need to check. Let me also put this inside more parentheses. So this is the one thing that you need to check, and then you need to check that at least one of these elements, so grid 0 and column, is not none. So you need to check that this is actually an X or an O. And if this is true, then it means that someone has won by column. So the winner will now be a grid 0 and column. Okay. So we're sort of using a two-dimensional array for our grid, and we're just checking if some elements are the same, so we know that someone has won. So if this is true, just set the winner to that. And now let's draw the line. So pg.draw.line. This will be window, comma, 250, comma, 0, comma, 0. And this now will be on column plus 1 times width divided by 3 minus width divided by 6, and then we have the column, or let's put some more parentheses, column plus 1 times width divided by 3 minus width divided by 6, and height for the y value, and we need a thickness of 4. So again, we're just drawing some lines between the points that have won. Just take the coordinates that I use for granted and use them like so. And then we're just going to break again, just like we did before. So now let's check for the diagonals specifically. Now you can't use a for loop here just the same way that we did before. We need to check for each diagonal individually, and there are just 2 diagonals, so this is not going to be that hard. So if our grid 0, 0 is equal to grid 1, 1 is equal to grid 2, 2. So if this is true, and also we need to check that the grid here, just let's check for 0, 0 is not none. Actually, I need to put this inside here, is not none. Okay, so if this is true, then that means that someone has gone diagonally, so the winner will be equal to the grid, and you can use any of these values. I'm just going to use 0, 0, and now let's draw the line. So pg dot draw dot line, and let's just draw this inside our window. Let's use 255, 70 and 70 for the color. Now let's just begin this at 50, 50, and let's end this line at 350, 350, and use a thickness of 4 just like before. So this is one diagonal check. So this is the diagonal check for, let me show you. So this is 0, 0, this is 1, 1, and this is 2, 2. So this is the first diagonal check, and then we will need, let me run this again, then we will need 2, 0, 1, 1 again, and 0, 2 over here. So these are the coordinates that we're going to check next on our grid. So if our grid 0, 2 here is also equal to grid 1, 1, and this is also equal to grid 2, 0, I believe, yes, 2, 0, and also we need the grid, any of these grids, so just the 0, 2 is not none. So if all of these are correct, then the winner is sitting at the grid 0 and 2. Okay, and now let's draw the line. So pg dot draw dot line, and let's draw this on the window, and let's use 250, 70 and 70, and let's also use 250 here instead of 255. Okay, and then we're just going to use 350 and 50 as the starting point, and 50 and 350 as the ending point, and of course the thickness of 4 that we've been using so far. And now let's just check for the draw condition. So let's make another if statement. So if all, and now all row for row in grid. So we need that, and winner is none. Then the draw will be equal to true. And then we just need to update state when we're done with this. Let me just explain this part here though. This is just checking if every part of the grid has been filled. This is a little more complicated syntax, but just keep in mind it just checks if every part here has been filled. So you can check this in, it's called a list comprehension, and you can check this in the Python 4 data structures course towards the end of lists in Python section. It's a little more complicated expression. It's used in the latest versions of Python. So it's fine if you can't really understand it. You could just do this more detailed under here if you didn't want to use a single compact expression like this. So remember, we're just checking here for row winners, so row wins or win. Here we're checking for column win, and here we're checking for diagonal wins. Okay, and here we're just checking check the draw, and then we're just updating the state. So now let's go ahead and define a function that is responsible to place those X's and those O's inside of our game. So now let's go ahead and define that. Define mark, and this will be a row and a column. So we will need a row and a column to be able to define where we will put our mark. And now we're just going to make the grid and the turn global to make sure we are aware of them. And now if our row is equal to 1, then the position X will be equal to 30. And then we can use the elif row is equal to 2. And then the pos X will be equal to width divided by 3 plus 30. So these numbers here are responsible to create the position of the different rows. They're just tested by me, so just use them as I'm using them. And now let's go ahead and check for row 3, if row equals 3. And now the position X for that is going to be width divided by 3 times 2 plus 30. Okay, and now let's go ahead and check for the columns. So if the column now is equal to 1, we're going to use the pos Y to set this equal to 30. Now else if the column is equal to 2, we're going to use the pos Y equals to the height divided by 3 plus 30. And now else if our column is equal to 3, we're going to use the pos Y equals to height divided by 3 times 2 plus 30. Okay, so we're just taking cases for whichever row and column we need. And now whatever we need to do next is something different. So let's do grid row -1, and we're using the -1 because remember the arrays are starting to count from 0 and not from 1, so we need to reduce the number by 1. And now we're using row -1 and column -1, so this will be equal to the turn. So this determines the mark by taking whoever's turn it is. So now we're saying if our turn is equal to X, so if the X player is playing, we're just going to do window.split X image on our pos X and pos Y for our positions. And then right after that we need to set our turn to be equal to the O player. Now else, so if it's not the turn of the X player, what we're going to do is just copy the same exact thing here, and instead of pasting the X image, we're just going to paste the O image and then change the turn to play the X player. So then we're just going to do a simple pg.display update, and this is it. This is responsible to mark whatever we need on the screen, so X or O, depending on these two values that we gave over here as arguments. So now let's go ahead and define the click function, and this is just going to be detecting whichever cell we click, and it's also responsible to be calling different methods and functions for our actions. So let's go ahead and define this. As you can see, this is not something that I can really explain. You just have to see how it works by me defining it. So define click, and now let's just define these x and y values. So pg.mouse.getPos. So we're just getting the position of the mouse and storing it to the x and y variables. And then we're just getting the column of mouse click. So let's just do if x is less than the width divided by 3 times 2. So if this is the one, we're talking about column 1. So else if our x is actually width divided by 3 times, oh, we actually don't need times 2 here, so just divided by 3. This is column 1 and this here is column 2. Now else if, or we could just do yes, okay, we need else if x is less than the width divided by 3, or just width, and then we are just going to set the column to 3. Now if none of these are true, if none of these are true, we're just setting the column to none. And now let's just do the same to get the rows. So we will be needing to do the y here instead of x, and height instead of width. Height here, row here instead of column. Just replace all of these so you don't have to write everything again. Okay, I'm just replacing them. Row here, and if none of these are true, the row will be equal to none. Okay, I think this is correct now. And then we're just going to call the mark function now that we know the rows and the columns. So we're just going to take a simple if. So we're just going to say if our row and column and grid row -1, column -1 is none. We actually don't need the extra set of parentheses here. So what this is going to check is just a row means that this will return true if this is not none. So if this is none, it will return false. If it's anything else, it will return true. So if the row is not none, and if the column is not none as well, and if the grid of these coordinates that we picked is none, so essentially what we mean is if we are clicking a box or a cell that is blank, then we can call the mark function. If we clicked on a cell that wasn't blank, if it wasn't none, we don't want it to do anything. We don't want it to overwrite the previous player's move. So if the cell is clear to use, we're just going to use my row and column to call this, and then we will call the check state method to actually check the state. Now, hopefully you understand what this does. This is just a click detector, basically. Now let's just define the refresh method. So define refresh, and what this is going to do is it will set all values to the initial stage and restart the game by calling the run game function. So we just need a global grid, winner, a turn, and a draw. And now we're just going to do a time.sleep3. So if someone has won, then after 3 seconds we want it to refresh, and we're just resetting the value. So turn X, the draw will be equal to false. We're just resetting everything back to the normal, and the winner will be none again. Our grid will be blank again. So let's just set this to none times 3 and none times 3, and finally none times 3. So we're just resetting everything just like we did up here at the beginning. So we're resetting everything back as it was, and then we just run the game. So what's left now is to define the run game function, which calls the game initialize function and runs the main game loop. So this will be probably our last method here. So define run game. So what this will do is a window.fill with white, a game initialize, and now this will be our main game loop. So while true. So while this is true, so this is our main game loop. Now we're doing the event checker for event in pg.event.get. So this is just our regular event handler. Now if event.type equals quit, we need to do pg.quit and also exit, and you can use here a sys.exit. Now else if the event.type equals to mouse button down, this is how we're checking for the mouse events. So if we clicked somewhere, we're just running the click, and if winner or draw, so if the game has somewhat ended here, we want to call the refresh. And of course, don't forget, every time we run this, we need a pg.display.update. And also let's just do the clock.tick with our FPS. Remember, FPS is 30, we said this before. So now let's see if we can run this. Okay, tic-tac-toe. Okay, so the problem is actually that I need to call the actual run game method, otherwise we can't start the game. Let's see if it works now. Okay, so it's X's turn. Let's put an X. Oh, there is a problem with that, as I can see. Okay, so I think I know where the problem is, and the problem is this needs to be reversed. So pos Y and pos X and pos Y and pos X. So these just need to be reversed. This is the mark method. Okay, so now let's see if it works. I'm placing an X over here. Okay, that works. I'm placing a O over here, X here, O here, X here. As you can see, we can say X1, and then the refresh method is called. That resets it after 3 seconds. Now, and as you will see now, we're actually drawing a line between the points that have 1. And let's also make a condition where the O wins. Okay, now let's actually try to make a tie here. Okay. Okay, so there is a problem when we are met with a tie. So let's try and fix this. Okay, so the problem is here in line 84. So this is the inside the check state for the column winning condition. I forgot here to add the Y value. So this should need a comma 0 over here. And I think this is the problem now. So if we go ahead and run this, and we actually make a column winning condition, okay, that works. Now let's try to also make this a tie. Oh, I actually won accidentally. Okay, let me just make this a tie. Okay, this is actually going to win again. Okay, so actually I managed to do it now. So this just displays game draw. I finally made it a draw. Okay, so the only thing we can add now is basically if we could just add buttons at the beginning of the game to make it start. Actually, it's something really fun. If you actually hold down your scroll wheel, it will mark all of them automatically. So in order to add that, let's go ahead here on the bottom. So let's go ahead and define here a draw menu method, and this is just going to create some buttons here. So window.fill with white and pg.draw.rect window and 0, 100 and 0. This will be the color, and now this is for the rectangle. So 150 and 220 is the starting coordinates, and this will be 100 by 30 pixels. Now let's create the font. So font equals pg.font.sysfont. This will be none and 24 for the size. And then let's just make the text and set this equal to font.render. This will just say play game, and this will be true over here, and this will be white. Okay, I think that what's left here is just pasting it on the screen. So window.blit text and paste it at the 154,230. Now let's also create an exit button. So pg.draw.rect and draw on the window. Okay, and use the color 100, 0 and 0, which is a faint red, and then 150 and 260 are the starting coordinates, and the button is going to be 120 by 30 pixels. And then font, just use, okay, so we have actually created this font, so we don't need to make this font again. So now just make the text 1 equal to font.render and just do exit game. This will be true and this will be white, and then just paste it on the screen. So window.blit text 1, and the coordinates now are going to be 152 and 270. And remember to always pg display update. Okay, I think now we should just define what these buttons are going to do inside of our run game. So let's define here a flag and set this to true. Now let's just call the draw menu over here. And now we actually don't need to call the game initialize and the window fill. And inside of our game loop, we are just going to check, and let's go inside here. So if we click the button, we could actually get the mouse position. So pg.mouse.getPosition. And then what we need to do before actually calling anything else, we're just going to check if our flag is true. And if our flag is true, we're just going to check which button we're clicking. So if the X is greater or equal than 150 and also the x is less or equal, let me put this inside parentheses, x is less or equal to 280, and also the y is greater or equal than 220, and the y is less or equal than 250. So these are just the boundaries of the button. If this is true, then we're just going to print, actually let's not print anything, let's just initialize the game, and let's set the flag to false. And now if we can just break from this event. Now let's just check if the other button is being clicked. So else if, and let's just set the coordinates for the other button, x is greater or equal than 150, and this is the same values for x because the buttons are on the same x positions, and the y now is going to be different, so y is greater or equal 260 and y is less or equal than 290. So let's just do pg.quit and sys.exit and also break, but this is just typically, this will not run because we're just exiting over here, and just use, so if this is not the case, we're just going to use an else here to run the click method that checks for everything else. So I think now we're ready to go. So we have these, okay, so the problem is that this else part needs to be inside here. So let's just add some indents over here. I think this will run now as it should. Okay, so if we press the exit game, we're just going to close the window. If we press the play game, we're just starting the game just like before. And we can play normally. And when we finish the game, we're just back at the starting screen. Okay, so what we changed was inside of our game loop, we are also checking if we press these two buttons. And if we are sitting on the screen, so this flag represents that we are on the menu screen. So if we are on the menu screen and we press these buttons, then these two actions will occur depending on which button we pressed. So else, so if this is not the case, if we are not sitting on the menu screen and we are sitting on the game screen, we're just going to run click, and we're just checking if the winner is someone or if there is a draw, and if so, we are refreshing the game. So this is what we changed in the event handler. The rest is just pretty much the same. So if you have any questions, just review the whole code. I know it's look at how much code we wrote today. It's a little complicated and it involves a lot of numbers which I got from trial and error, so maybe you need to figure them out on your own. But what you need to keep from this is just how different methods call each other and how you are splitting everything into different sections to make this more understandable and more clean. So imagine if you had all of these inside one method, it would just be a complete mess. So this is why the skill of splitting every task into an individual method is really, really important, and it's a really good practice to use while programming, especially for such big programs. Okay, I think this is it. I don't think anything is missing from our game. So just try to replicate this. As an exercise, what you can do is add a different function. So maybe, I don't know, just add something to the game that you think is going to make it better. Whether that is a just a graphics thing, or just like changing the color or adding a different button, or if it's just a functionality, a different functionality that I haven't added yet. Okay, that's it. Make sure you practice, and I will see you on the next lesson.